The entire executive floor shimmered in blue and silver. Balloons bobbed against the ceiling. Streamers lined the hallways, and the conference room smelled faintly of buttercream. At the center of it all sat a massive cake with 500% growth written in bold blue icing. I stood there, letting the applause wash over me, believing naively that this was finally my moment. 3 years of missed birthdays, abandoned vacations, and sleepless strategy sessions had led here. My team cheered the loudest. Some clapped until their hands turned red. Others whistled. Luther, our CEO, stepped beside me, his arm heavy on my shoulder. He had that fatherly grin I used to chase like oxygen. I thought I'd earned it at last. He began his speech, praising the department, my leadership, the historic growth numbers. Faces turned toward me, nodding, beaming, like they were proud to have placed their bets on the right horse. I felt that rare surge of belonging, the sense that maybe I'd carved out something that could never be ignored. Then the presentation clicked forward. On the screen flashed the visuals of our most successful campaign, the one I had designed from the ground up. Every tagline and every pixel, but beneath the image, in bold letters, was a name that wasn't mine. Creative Direction Drew Reed. A ripple of polite applause followed, shallow but practiced, as though the audience had been primed. My breath caught in my throat. Drew. Luther's 22-year-old son, a boy with more tailored suits than work experience. I forced myself to stand straighter, even as my stomach turned. Luther's voice swelled with pride as the doors opened and Drew walked in, haircut sharp, jacket slightly too large. He looked like a mannequin dressed for success. Today marks a new chapter, Luther declared, clapping his son on the back. I'm proud to introduce our new Vice President of Marketing, Drew Reed. The applause roared again, but it sounded different now, hollow and distant. My heart pounded, my promotion dissolving in front of me. Drew crossed the room, extending his hand with a smirk that flickered just enough to betray arrogance. I shook it, steady, professional, my smile practiced. But inside, something cracked and shifted. This wasn't just replacement, it was erasure, and even as the cheers echoed around me, I knew I would never let this moment be the final word. I released his hand, lifted my glass of champagne, and began rehearsing the calm mask I'd need for what came next. I closed my office door behind me, the muted roar of applause still echoing in my ears. The silence felt heavier than any humiliation. On my screen, new emails blinked in subject lines dripping with congratulations, but not for me. Every message was addressed to Drew. Some called him a visionary, others praised his fresh leadership. They had learned quickly where the wind was blowing. Then came the knock. Luther stepped in without waiting, his cologne reaching the room before his words. "Naomi," he said warmly, as though the knife he'd just twisted didn't exist. "I'll need you to help Drew transition. Show him the ropes, introduce him to clients, make sure he succeeds." I nodded once, the way you nod at a stranger asking for the time. He patted my shoulder, muttering about how much he valued me as a team player. That phrase, once harmless, now sounded like a corporate epitaph. When the door closed, I sat at my desk, staring at the framed photos of campaigns that had kept the company alive. I thought of the pneumonia I'd worked through last winter, the late nights hunched over analytics while friends celebrated holidays without me, the canceled vacations that still sat as unused credits in my inbox. All of it, discarded in the span of a smile and a handoff to a boy who'd never met a deadline. But calm settled over me, almost unnaturally. If loyalty was a one-way street, then I'd reached the dead end, and I wasn't about to stand there waiting for the traffic to crush me. I opened a hidden folder on my laptop. Inside were months of careful preparation client dossiers, strategy drafts, and discreet lunch invitations already on the calendar. While Luther paraded his son, I had been drawing my own map out of this place. The betrayal stung, but the clarity it brought was sharper. I wasn't broken. I was armed. I shut the folder, leaned back in my chair, and let the quiet fury harden into focus, already imagining the first meeting I had scheduled for the morning. When I first walked through the glass doors of Hallberg and Reed, the air smelled of desperation. The market was tanking. Layoffs loomed, and the marketing department was more rumor mill than strategy hub. I was 29, untested in a company that chewed through talent like office snacks. Yet I believed I could fix what was broken. I pitched campaigns others said were too risky. Lean digital pushes when competitors clung to print. Community-driven storytelling in industries that preferred polished jargon. Some failed spectacularly, but the ones that worked kept clients from bolting. Each small win bought the firm a little more time, a little more hope. People stopped whispering about cuts. They started whispering about me. I should have been proud, but pride came with a cost. Thanksgiving dinners with my sister Camille turned into apologetic phone calls. Next year, I promise, I'd say, while staring at campaign drafts littering my coffee table. Birthdays blurred into boardroom deadlines. When pneumonia hit one winter, I propped myself up on pillows, laptop balanced on my knees, coughing between client calls. There was no applause for those nights, only the silent reward of survival. My father, a retired firefighter in Ohio, used to tell me, "Hard work will speak for you. Naomi, you don't need to shout." For years, I carried that line like armor. Every canceled holiday, every sacrificed friendship, I told myself the work was speaking on my behalf. That if I poured myself out completely, one day the company would pour back into me. Now I see the flaw. Hard work doesn't speak. It whispers, easily drowned out by the confident chatter of men with the right last name. If my work had spoken as loudly as I believed, my name would have been on that slide, not Drew's. The bitterness settled deep, heavier than exhaustion. My sacrifices had built their empire, but they had silenced me in the process. And as I stared at the remnants of those years, the anger stopped burning and began to crystallize into something colder, sharper, ready to cut in silence. Drew started showing up at my side like an ill-fitting shadow, in meetings. He repeated my points seconds after I made them, earning nods from executives who pretended not to notice the echo. To clients, he leaned on phrases I had crafted years earlier, tossing them out as if they were his fresh ideas. Watching him fumble through rehearsed lines was like seeing a counterfeit bill passed off as real currency obvious to anyone who looked closely, but accepted anyway because of the signature printed on top. I kept my face composed, my voice steady. On the outside, I was the loyal lieutenant, the consummate professional. But inside, I was measuring every slip, every arrogance, wondering how long this house of cards could stand before gravity demanded its due. One afternoon, as Drew droned through a presentation I had written, my phone buzzed beneath the table. It was a text from Illa in accounting numbers don't add up for Westbrook Industries. Luther's hiding something. I felt a current of recognition jolt through me. This wasn't just about nepotism anymore. It was about deception, rot at the foundation. I looked across the table at Luther, laughing too loudly at one of Drew's missteps, masking pride with bluster. My disappointment congealed into something sharper. If loyalty was supposed to be blind, mine had been gouged out long ago. By the time the meeting ended, I had already made my choice. I would no longer content myself with being replaced. I would not just endure, not just survive. I would act. As Drew strutted out, phone in hand, I stayed behind, gathering my notes. I could feel the line I had crossed not with anger, but with clarity. Disappointment was over. What came next was strategy. And waiting in a locked folder on my laptop was the dossier that would set everything in motion. That evening, I sat alone in my office, the blinds drawn, the city glowing faintly beyond the glass. I opened the folder no one else knew existed my insurance policy. For months, I had been compiling it in pieces, stray documents slipped into the wrong folders, casual remarks from staff, financial reports that didn't align. All of it had formed into a picture I could no longer ignore. At the center of the dossier was Westbrook Industries, our crown jewel, responsible for nearly 40% of our revenue. On paper, our campaigns with them were flawless growth charts that climbed like mountain peaks, engagement numbers that sparkled. But in the raw spreadsheets, the ones tucked into forgotten subfolders, the numbers told another story. The growth wasn't real. Metrics had been doctored, targets massaged until fiction looked like fact. I remembered the first time I stumbled across a quarterly file misfiled in the shared drive. The engagement rate was abysmal, nowhere near the glossy report I had just presented. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some intern's error, but then I traced the edits, saw Luther's digital fingerprints buried in the metadata. That was the day I began documenting, quietly, carefully. And now, flipping deeper into the file, I found more than fabricated data. Payments routed through shell vendors, invoices padded and signed off with alarming speed. The recipients led back to one name, Luther's brother-in-law. It wasn't incompetence or even desperation, it was fraud, calculated, deliberate, and masked behind my hard work. I leaned back, the weight of it pressing into me. This wasn't just leverage, this was the kind of truth that could end a career, topple a company, and drag a family name through the mud. The irony was almost too rich. Luther had thought me replaceable, a cog he could swap out for his son. But the machine he had built was rotten, and I was the only one holding the receipts. I closed the dossier and rested my hand on the cover. Steady. I wasn't carrying disappointment anymore. I was carrying a weapon, and it was almost time to use it. I kept my lunches off the company calendar. A quiet email here, a text there, a handshake agreement for catching up. By the end of the week, I had 3 meetings lined up. The first was with Marcus Westbrook himself. He greeted me at a small French bistro, the kind of place where conversations blurred into clinking glasses. I laid the documents in front of him, my tone even, my expression neutral. These are the actual numbers, I said, not the ones you've been shown. Marcus read in silence, his face growing redder with every line. He didn't accuse me, didn't demand explanations. He simply nodded, folded the papers, and slipped them into his briefcase. I appreciate the honesty, he said finally. His voice clipped. 2 days later, I met with another client, a family-owned firm out of Boston. The CEO's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. If this goes public, he whispered, we'll be dragged down with him. He hesitated, torn between outrage and fear. I didn't push. I simply slid a business card across the table, Reed Strategy Group, embossed in silver lettering. I'd registered the company 2 months earlier. Quietly, while everyone else was distracted by Drew's staged ascension. Not every meeting went smoothly. One client, a longtime ally, flatly refused. We stand by Halberg and Reed, he said firmly. His loyalty to Luther was stubborn, maybe even genuine. I nodded, left the folder untouched, but let the card remain on the table. I knew time would do the persuading that I didn't need to. Back at the office, Drew leaned against my doorframe, sighing theatrically. Dad keeps piling stuff on me, he said, tossing a leather-bound planner onto my desk. This VP thing is exhausting. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. He had no idea. I offered him a polished smile, closing my laptop where his father's empire was unraveling one quiet lunch at a time. And as Drew rambled about golf outings and client dinners, I knew the seeds I'd planted were already beginning to take root. Delano's was Luther's chosen stage. Dark leather booths, overpriced steaks, and a wine list meant to impress men who measured power in vintages. I'd sat through enough of these lunches to know the script Luther would boast. Drew would nod along, and clients would smile politely while calculating margins in their heads. That afternoon, Marcus Westbrook arrived first, his expression polite but unreadable. Drew followed close behind Luther, practically glowing with borrowed confidence. I slid into my seat across from them, calm, almost detached, as though watching a play I'd already read the ending to. Luther launched into his performance, praising Drew as the fresh leadership our firm needs to take us into the future. He recited growth numbers like scripture, his tone swelling with false conviction. Drew grinned and added nothing of substance, just the occasional exactly or that's right. Marcus dabbed his mouth with his napkin, set it down carefully, and looked straight at Luther. We're terminating our contract. His voice cut through the performance like glass shattering on marble. For the first time in years, Luther faltered. Excuse me. Marcus leaned back, unflinching. Naomi showed me the real numbers. You've been lying to me. That ends today. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the hiss of the steak on the grill across the room. Drew blinked, his smirk collapsing. What's happening? Dad, he whispered, the bravado gone from his voice. Before Luther could answer, his phone buzzed on the table, then mine, then Marcus's. 2 more clients, almost simultaneously, announcing contract terminations. My glass of wine caught the light as I lifted it. Slow and deliberate. Luther's confident smile dissolved, his voice trembling as he tried to protest. The kingdom he'd built wasn't crashing in a single blow. It was being dismantled. One client, one email, one truth at a time. I took a sip of wine, savoring the calm, and watched the walls of his empire begin to fold inward. The weeks after Delano's felt strangely quiet. Contracts shifted into my hands, my calendar filled with client meetings, and the phone rang constantly with offers. Yet one evening, as the office emptied and the city lights flickered on outside, a knock startled me. Drew stood in the doorway. He looked smaller than I remembered. The sharp edges of his arrogance dulled. His suit finally fit, but his shoulders slumped as though it weighed twice as much. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice thin. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat, rubbing his palms against his knees, eyes darting like a trapped animal. "I never wanted this," he blurted. "The job, the title. Dad shoved it on me. Said I had to prove myself, but he never trusted me to do anything. He just used me. Like he uses everyone." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. Setting it on my desk, he pushed it toward me with trembling fingers. "This has everything. Offshore accounts, shell companies, 10 years of fraud. He's been stealing from his own clients, from the board, from everyone. I didn't touch it. Not yet. My mom," Drew continued, his voice cracking. "She used to run part of the business. He crushed her, manipulated her until she broke down, took custody of me, stripped her of her shares. She hasn't recovered." His eyes finally met mine. "He'll do the same to me if I stay. I don't want to be him." I studied him, searching for the smirk I'd seen that first day, the arrogance that had stung like salt in a wound. It wasn't there. What sat across from me wasn't an enemy. It was another casualty of Luther's empire. Slowly, I picked up the flash drive, its weight heavier than it should have been. Drew exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. And for the first time since the celebration that cut me down, I realized I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore. I sat with the flash drive for 2 days before making my decision. Regulators would bury it in bureaucracy. Lawyers would tie it up in red tape. I didn't want a quiet investigation. I wanted the world to see him fall. So I called a journalist I trusted, Elliot Harrow, the one who had been circling Luther's company for months. "I have a story," I told him, "but I need your word on protecting sources." Within a week, the exposé hit. Every detail was laid out: falsified metrics, offshore accounts, shell vendors. My name was nowhere in print, but anyone who read between the lines could see who had guided the knife. Cameras swarmed the glass tower of Halberg and Reed. By noon, the stock had plummeted 12%. By evening, federal agents walked Luther out in handcuffs, his face pale and stiff as flashbulbs erupted. Calls flooded in. Employees, weary of being pawns, reached out to me one by one. First Amara from Analytics, then Kai from Creative, then 3 more whose loyalty had been buried under years of fear. They didn't just want jobs, they wanted to rebuild something honest. Then came the twist I didn't expect. The client who had refused me weeks earlier, the one who swore loyalty to Luther, called my personal line. "We were wrong," he admitted, voice low. "We want to sign with you, bigger than before." I said nothing at first, just let the silence underline the shift of power. That night, a collect call rang through from the county jail. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. "You destroyed me," Luther hissed, his voice stripped of polish. "Why? What do you want, money?" "A title name your price." I waited a beat, steady, then answered coldly. "These aren't threats, Luther. They're consequences." The line went dead, and I knew it would be the last time I ever heard his voice tremble in my ear. 2 years passed, and the skyline looked different from the corner office of Reed Strategy Group. Our name appeared on industry lists, whispered in boardrooms, and inked into contracts larger than I had ever imagined. What began with 5 defected clients had multiplied into dozens. I now employed more than 50 people, each of them loyal not because they had to be, but because they believed in what we built together. Some mornings, I caught myself pausing at the glass wall, watching the floor below buzz with energy creatives sketching, analysts crunching, project managers racing against deadlines. It was the same chaos I once shouldered alone, now spread across a team that respected me enough to carry it together. My name no longer chased validation. It commanded it. Then, one afternoon, a plain envelope appeared on my desk. No return address. Inside was a clipping from the Wall Street Journal former CEO sentenced to 15 years for fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. Below the headline, scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting, were 6 words: "The house of cards always falls." I stared at the line, wondering if it came from Drew, from an old colleague, or from someone who simply wanted me to know the story had finally closed its loop. I folded the clipping and slid it into my drawer. For a long time, I sat there, remembering the woman who once worked herself sick for a company that saw her as replaceable. That woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, unwilling to be silenced again. Luther lost everything: his company, his freedom, his reputation. I gained something he never could: the power to create, the respect to keep it, and the clarity to protect it. The greatest revenge hadn't been his downfall. It was this, an empire he could never touch, born from the ashes of his betrayal. And as the hum of my office carried through the glass, I realized I wasn't living in the shadow of what they took from me anymore. I was standing in the light of what I built,